Okay, so we got interrupted. Well, not interrupted. The fellow started talking to me, and unfortunately the video ran out during the conversation, so we don't have all of it. But essentially what happened is a fellow came by as I was engaged in my little monologue. He was looking quite intently at the picket signs. And before asking me a single question, he said, "Is there anything, I can do to support you?" And that is actually kind of surprising because it's the first time anyone's actually, well, that's not the first time anyone's actually offered support, but it's the first time somebody's reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of change and offered it to me, to go buy a coffee or something, which I found interesting. So anyway, I ended up, explaining to him, what this was all about. And it turned out he was a Greek Catholic fellow. So, he was interested to learn, that Unitarian Universalists, including Unitarian Universalist ministers, can be atheists, i.e. people who do not believe in God at all, and that a subset of those atheist Unitarian Universalists can be anti-religious bigots, such as Reverend Ray Drennan. And so I explained to the fellow, how Reverend Ray Drennan had labeled me as psychotic because I'm claiming a quite profound religious/mystical experience, and how, since I knew the guy was Greek Catholic, I thought he might be interested to know that besides that attack on me, Reverend Ray Drennan had offensively attacked the Roman Catholic funeral of former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau in an intolerant and offensive opinion editorial in the Montreal Gazette soon after that funeral took place. In fact, that was, I remember the exact date of this article actually, because it happened to fall on my birthday, October 9th. It was quite a nice birthday present, this op-ed from Ray Drennan making a total fool of himself in the Gazette, showing his anti-religious intolerance and bigotry to the Montreal public and anyone else who read that opinion editorial in the Gazette across the country and around the world. So yeah, that was a nice little birthday present, and this was actually October 9th of 2000. So it was just a few months before I was arrested on the criminal charges that I was talking about earlier. Yes, we'll get back to that very soon. But essentially, this fellow who I spoke with, just in terms of seeing my picket signs, he read them quite intently. A Church of the Image Tarnishing Minister, Church that spits in God's eye, Unitarian Prejudice and Bigotry sucks you asterisk you. And I think before speaking with me, or maybe during speaking with me, he came around and he looked at this one, Unitarian Bullying and Bigotry suck you asterisk you. So I explained to him essentially how unfortunately some atheist Unitarians, including but by no means limited to one Reverend Ray Drennan, are quite intolerant of God-believing people who go out of their way to insult and verbally and psychologically abuse God-believing people, and how a lot of these atheists are predominantly anti-Christian, and that their anti-Christian attitude tends towards also anti-Catholic and specifically anti-Roman Catholic bad attitude, which was exemplified by Reverend Ray Drennan's attack on Pierre Elliott Trudeau's state funeral. So anyway, getting back to the criminal charges, which I was arrested for soon after Reverend Ray Drennan's wrong message, which was an interesting title for his wrong message, as it were, about Pierre Elliott Trudeau's state funeral. We were talking about how I was acquitted of the charges, and we're looking at these slit windows here, which I think you can pretty well figure out, you know, because they are so narrow, because they are a reasonable distance above the ground. Like, for instance, looking at this window here, which is the lowest of the windows other than this full length stained glass affair, but this is the lowest slit window that's clear, and if you look at it, you'll just have to take my word for this, the bottom of the window is about the height of my head, or even higher. So if someone was to look out that window, you know, sitting some distance away in a seat and look out, they probably wouldn't even see me at all. I'd probably be below the level of the window, but at worst they'd see the top of my head go by the window as I walk by. So I cannot be seen inside the sanctuary when there's a sermon taking place. I was charged with disrupting the order and solemnity of church services. I told the Crown Prosecutor, you know, before going to trial, that look, you know, they can't see me inside the church. You know, there's these slit windows, and you know, they're almost impossible to see out of. I mean, if we look at this one, it's totally blocked. There's a memorial there, a stained glass thing in a wood case, totally blocking the window, so nobody can see out that window. The other two up there are too high for anyone to see out of. You know, they can see out, but all they're going to see is like trees and sky. This is the only window where they might possibly be able to see me, but as I said, it's above my head level, basically, especially if they're sitting below it and looking out. And then there's this window. Well, yes, I suppose people sitting in the chairs on the other side of that window, if they look through it, they might get a partially obscured view of me. But then again, in the summer, there's actually leaves on that shrub, so they wouldn't really be able to see much through the leaves. So basically, I am not visible inside the church. I can't be heard inside the church because I'm not making much noise and it's pretty soundproof. Then we have this atrium-like, that's not even atrium, it just has a big window. This is the lobby entrance area of the church. This is about the only window where I can actually be seen out of when I'm protesting. And yes, I am seen out of that window. So we'll get back to this trial. I am questioning one Val Bourdon, one of the more intolerant and bigoted atheist members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. He was a prosecution witness against me. So I asked Val Bourdon, can you hear me when you're inside the church during, you know, the service? You know, when you're in the sanctuary? And his answer was no, which is exactly the answer I wanted to hear. No further questions. So then I asked Val Bourdon, can you see me when you're in the sanctuary during a Sunday service? And he said yes. Now, I've already explained the situation here. So I asked him, how? How can you see me inside the church, in the sanctuary, when the service is happening? And he said, oh, there are people staring at you through the lobby window. And he's talking about this window here. And he's right. Some people do look quite intently at me through this window on occasion. So, the next question that I posed to Val Bourdon was, do you celebrate church services in the lobby? And his answer was a long, drawn-out moan, no, something like that. It really was kind of like that. I actually have the audio recording of you know, what he said and how he said it. So, basically, that was 2 strikes against Val Bourdon. You know, yes, people are looking at me outside this window, but hey, that's got nothing to do with the church services, does it? It's totally unconnected to the church service. So then and of course the whole thing was, you know, whether they see me or not, you know, even if they do see me, you know, I have to be doing something that they see that actually disrupts the service. So that was the end of that story. And so the third question, you know, the obvious question is, well, has the church service ever actually been disrupted? You know, because that's what I was charged with, you know, disrupting the order and solemnity of a church service. That's pretty much the exact words of the law, or it's actually, if I remember correctly, a closer wording would be disturbing the order and solemnity of a meeting held for a religious purpose. I believe that's pretty much an exact quote or close to an exact quote, but you know, it means a church service, more or less. I suppose it could be other types of religious service as well. So the question is, you know, have I, you know, actually caused the disruption of a church service? Well, Val Bourdon answered in a manner similar to the previous prosecution witness. Oh, well, you know, I feel terribly uncomfortable inside, you know, when you're out there and, you know, I'm inside, you know, I don't like it at all. I'm not happy. Nah. And so I had to make it clear to Val Bourdon, well, you know, that law is not about how you feel. You know, the law is about whether or not a service is actually being disrupted or not. And so, has a service ever stopped and started again as a result of my protest outside the church? And Val Bourdon had to acknowledge, well, no, actually, as a matter of fact, no church service has ever stopped and started again as a result of my protest. So it's sort of like 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. And very soon after that, the Crown prosecutor threw in the proverbial towel. You know, the Crown prosecutor, quite honorably, I think, but also I think quite pragmatically, called for an end to the trial. He spoke initially to the judge, because I'm representing myself. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not aware of, you know, all of the various legal niceties. So the prosecutor spoke to the judge and basically informed and reminded the judge that there's something called a motion of non-suit, which is essentially a motion that the defendant or his lawyers can make that essentially says, well, the prosecution did not prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, therefore, you know, I should be acquitted because, you know, they haven't presented enough evidence. And the Crown prosecutor even went on to make it clear to the judge, you know, that he had not been able to prove even one of the 4 or 5 points of law that he had to prove beyond any reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction. So it's not like he, you know, proved 2 or 3 of the 4 or 5 points of law, but was unable to prove, you know, 1 or 2 of the other ones. He couldn't prove one single point of any of the 4 or possibly 5 points of law that he had to prove beyond any reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction. So he was like totally blown out of the water just in terms of my cross-examination of the prosecution witnesses in the prosecution phase of the trial. So basically he's asking the judge to let him throw in the towel. Basically asking me, because I have to make the motion, he's basically asking me to make a motion of non-suit, saying, well, you know, you didn't prove your case and that's it, game over. Well, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to present a defense, even though it obviously was completely unnecessary. It was glaringly obvious that I had already won, in the sense that the Crown prosecutor had not been able to prove a single one of the points he needed to prove. But no, I wanted to present a defense. You know, I wanted to sort of rub it in a little bit, as it were, to show to what extent the Unitarian Church of Montreal had tried to misuse and abuse the Canadian Criminal Code. I wanted to show how the defense, the prosecution witnesses had lied and misrepresented the facts, because in some cases they had, and so on. I just wanted to present a defense to just really show how this misuse and abuse of the law was a bit much. And the judge actually granted that request, demand, whatever, refusal to make a motion of non-suit. He accepted that, and he actually scheduled a date for the next court appearance. What happened is the Crown prosecutor, who obviously didn't want to go through that, because he wouldn't come out of it looking very good, obviously. He already didn't look good, but he wasn't going to look any better, and could look a lot worse by the time my defense was done. So what happened is he, a few days later, moved for an acquittal, more or less behind my back. I actually was served with a notice of this. I don't know to what extent I could have contested it anyway, but I was in the process of moving at the time, and the bailiff didn't do his job properly. He just slipped the notice under the door of my old apartment. So I didn't get the notice. I wasn't aware of it and didn't appear. And so the prosecutor was able to convince the judge that, it was all said and done, and I was acquitted. And that, as a result of that, was not able to present a defense. So in a sense, my right to a full and complete defense, which is another thing that's guaranteed in the Constitution, was not really respected. Good evening. So anyhow, I think we're more or less done with this. One thing I've noticed is that very few people have entered and left the Unitarian Church of Montreal while I've been here tonight. There was supposed to be a supper at 6 o'clock, a social event. Now, when I began my protest, I was at the rear parking lot entrance because of the situation here. This was largely blocked, so I didn't expect many people to be coming in the front. Oh, there's some people in the lobby now. Maybe a half dozen or so. I could see 3 or 4. But there's probably a couple more that I can't. So anyway, we began this protest before 6 o'clock because there was this social event of the season, as it were. And I'm just noticing there's incredibly few people showed up here. There are a couple coming out now. So Sheila, if I don't have a life doing this, I guess President Morales doesn't have a life when he's protesting against immigration stuff, eh? I guess President Morales doesn't have a life when he's blocking entrance to Sheriff Arpaio's jail and stuff like that. I have a feeling, Robin, that you're more up on it than I am. So. Yes, I am, because you have not engaged in a free and responsible search for the truth and meaning of my protest, which means that maybe you shouldn't have insulted me by telling me to get a life. Well, yeah, okay, I agree. Thank you. How about if you do, you know what Chalica is? Have you heard of Chalica? No. Google Chalica and then practice it, please. So that is Sheila Larson. Somewhat penitent, I think. I think I made my point. She entered the church earlier and she saw me and she told me to get a life or something. She didn't actually say get a life. She She said, you know, you have to have a life, or whatever. It was basically get a life, even if that might not be the exact words. And so I confronted her about that as she's leaving. And my point was, you know, if I don't have a life when I'm out here protesting, because that's essentially what you're saying, is like, you know, like, this protest is not a life. You know, this is a useless activity. This is a total waste of time. So my point, as I saw her coming, was, well, I guess if I don't have a life protesting, then neither does UUA President Peter Morales when he's out protesting. You know, neither does President Bill Sinkford when he's protesting, and so on. You know, if I don't have a life, I guess they don't have a life either when they're protesting. I think she sort of got that point, and I think she kind of understood that it's pretty much an insult to say get a life to someone, under any circumstance, really. So she was somewhat penitent. I think she also agreed because she just didn't want to argue anymore. So it's basically like just agreeing to get out of the situation she found herself in. But nonetheless, I think she did get it. I think she realized that, you know, well, actually, maybe I do have some good reasons to be doing this. She basically acknowledged that by also acknowledging her own ignorance, you know, like not being as informed about things as I am. Well, yeah, gee, no kidding. I'm the one protesting here. I think I have a pretty good idea why I'm protesting. You know, maybe you should find out too. You know, Unitarian Universalists claim to believe in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That is the fourth principle, which was observed yesterday during Chalica. And that is one of the most important Unitarian Universalist principles in terms also of justice. You know, the second principle of Unitarian Universalism calls for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Well, you can't have justice without a free and responsible search for the truth and meaning of things. You know, when you go to a court of law as a witness, you are sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Telling the truth is a very, very important part of the whole justice system. Justice is about truth very much. So people like Sheila Larson, who choose ignorance over informing themselves about what this protest is about, are flaunting Unitarian Universalist principles. And I think she kind of got that too. I mean, I confronted about her that earlier. I made it clear that I believe that she wasn't living up to Unitarian Universalist principles. She even said, oh, we tried. I said, well, you're not really trying very hard. You know? And they really aren't. Quite the opposite. I mean, many times. I won't accuse her specifically of it, but other Unitarians actually go out of their way to totally disregard Unitarian Universalist principles, to behave in a way that is in complete contradiction of Unitarian Universalist principles. Sheila Larson, I can't accuse her of actively flaunting Unitarian Universalist principles, but just in terms of her choosing ignorance over information in terms of this protest, that is a serious failing. It's a failure to live up to the fourth principle, and it is also a failure to live up to the second principle. And when it gets right down to it, it's a failure to live up to the first principle in a way. The first principle calls for respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, that's open to some interpretation, obviously. The word that maybe is most open to interpretation is inherent. But nonetheless, you know, it clearly speaks about respect for the worth of a person and the dignity of a person. And the way I see it is that if somebody is protesting, and specifically protesting a problem with your church, you know, that makes these claims, to ignore that protest, to pretend that protest has no validity whatsoever, to make no effort to find out what it's about, and to try to, you know, act upon the second principle, to me, is a violation of the first principle. If an injustice, or at least an alleged injustice, is brought to your attention as a Unitarian Universalist, you know, and especially if it's an injustice involving your religious community or your church, and somebody says, hey, there's been an injustice here, and they're protesting, and you ignore that protest, well, you're flaunting the fourth principle. You're not engaging in a free and responsible search for the truth and meaning of the protest. You're failing to live up to the second principle, which calls for justice and equity and compassion in human relations, because by making no effort to find out the truth, you're doing absolutely nothing to try to move towards justice. And you're essentially flaunting the first principle as well, because you're basically saying to the person who's protesting, well, you have no value. You know, we have no respect for your protest. You know, screw you. You know, we don't have any respect for you. Screw your own dignity, and so on. So that's like 1, 2, 3 of the 7 principles shot down right there, just in terms of ignoring a protest. That is pretty much that. Now I'm noticing that the lights in the sanctuary have been turned off, so it seems that whatever was going on is no longer going on. So only 2 people came out. Sheila Larson and one other woman. I see one other woman in the sanctuary. A man is coming out right now, or at least went to the door. So I will just retrieve my picket signs. So there's a couple of people still inside. But the point being is, you know, hardly anyone was here tonight. There was a social supper at 6 o'clock. And then at 7:30 there was supposed to be some kind of memorial for the women who had been murdered by Marc Le Pen at the École Polytechnique. I don't think anyone showed up, or very few. I suspect that that's why Sheila Larson was here. I suspect that in terms of the timing of when she arrived and her now leaving, that Sheila Larson was here for that specific event, and I presume the woman who left with her was. Well, that's two women. As I said, there's a couple of other people still in the lobby area, or there were, and there were a few cars in the parking lot before I came here, not more than a half a dozen or so. So I am under the impression that there was a very low turnout for this memorial or commemoration of the murder of young women at the École Polytechnique. You know, so here we have David Rollert earlier this evening saying that I have no shame because I am protesting against a variety of Unitarian Universalist injustices and abuses tonight. I would say that it's pretty darn shameful how few Montreal Unitarians actually turned out for that memorial. I would be surprised if it was more than a dozen, and it could have been considerably less. We might have been looking at maybe half a dozen or so people in terms of who I've actually seen enter and leave the church, you know. So here's David Rollert saying, I have no shame because I decide that tonight's as good a night as any to protest against Unitarian Universalist injustices and abuses, which do include sexual crimes against women. In fact, even murder of women by Unitarian Universalists does happen.